So it's only a few days ago now. There's one thing that I'm going to predict, and this is no prediction. I think it's just kind of common sense because of what we know already. Whatever happens on election night, I think Donald Trump is going to claim that he's won. Whatever happens, because he does not know the meaning of gracious defeat. Um, 4 years on, he still refuses to accept that he lost in 2020. JD Vance, shrunk away from this question when Walt put it to him. He gave this weaselly answer about looking forward. But, his boss, the man he will be working under, will not look forward. Donald Trump wants revenge. He refuses to admit that he lost in 2020 and he wants revenge. He has clearly stated he will go for revenge if he's re-elected. So I think it's pretty pathetic for Vance to be talking about their campaign looking forward. It's, ridiculous. Neither candidate is a totally fresh face. Harris has been vice president for 4 years and Trump is a former president, so neither of them is completely new. That's an important point. I think Harris obviously is infinitely better than Trump as a candidate. I mean, I'm not neutral on this at all. I've never wanted I've never wanted the result so much as Harris to defeat Donald Trump in this election. That doesn't mean I agree with her on everything. It doesn't mean I don't have concerns about the Democrats. Um, if I were an American voter, I would probably class myself as a moderate. I have no time for the woke left, and I'm very aware that Harris has pandered to them at times. So, that's something I definitely am aware of it. But given the choice that there is, if I were an American voter, it would simply be a no-brainer because the things I think that do matter, such as personal character, respecting democracy, rule of law, those sort of things, and there's other things that are important as well, of course, but those things are important. On every single one, Donald Trump fails. He doesn't respect democracy because he will not admit that he lost. He is a convicted criminal. I think actually it's a disgrace he's even on the ballot. And if he gets back into the White House, and we don't know what form this revenge will take, but if he does go to some extreme measures, and we just don't know yet, it may all be rhetoric. But I think even rhetoric can be dangerous. If this happens, then the judges that kind of said, "Well, we'll wait until after the election." They will have a lot to answer for by not imposing punishments on Trump at the time when he was convicted. That's, I think, a very controversial decision. Um, I've just seen a video where they were asking voters in Georgia who they were going to vote for, 100 voters in Georgia, and a lot of them were for Trump. There's a young black guy, and the interviewer said, "Why is it young black people are going for Trump here?" And he says, "We like money." Um, and I see this sort of answer from a lot of Trump voters. Actually, the racial thing, in some ways, that part is exaggerated slightly because, I mean, I think Trump is toxic, but it is kind of hard to portray his Republicans as overtly racist when they do clearly have a lot of minority support. Probably less than the Democrats, but there is a lot of black people and Hispanics who support Trump. There's no getting away from that, and some Asian Americans as well. So it's a little bit lazy, for example, to call Trump a white supremacist or something like that. I think certainly there's people around him who are, like Laura Loomer, and apparently Nick Fuentes has turned on him now. But the Puerto Rico thing certainly wouldn't have done his campaign any good. But you ask Trump voters, they will say that Harris is losing support. I mean, in Georgia, for example, one guy said, look what she's done and look what that lady's done in California. California is a state that has a lot of problems. Democrats have to be honest about that. So it's all very well for me to talk about democracy and rule of law and all those things. I mean, that should matter. But I have to remember that the average American voter, I don't think they care that much about those things. I mean, this isn't to be condescending. It's just what I've noticed. You know, they will say, "Oh, well, he might be good for the economy." Yes, he talks a lot of even a lot of solid Trump voters will admit that he talks a lot of nonsense. But it's almost like this is a big problem I have, which is a lot of Trump apologists and Trump supporters will say that they know he says a lot of dubious things. They might even admit that he's a liar, but they'll go with it anyway because it might be good for the economy. I saw one guy in Wisconsin say, "Oh, the man's awful. He says awful things, but I'm still going to vote for him because he might be good for the economy." And I think the way he put it was focus on the message, not the messenger. But what is Donald Trump's message? Donald Trump's message is admiring dictators like Putin. I mean, you know, with all due respect to the guy, that was ridiculous. That was a ridiculous thing to say because the message is just as bad as the messenger. It's not like Trump is a toxic character, but he says some reasonable things. A lot of the things he says isn't reasonable. And, by the way, not realistic. He's going to let down his own voters. This is another point. You know, if you are a Trump voter in one of those swing states and you're angry about illegal immigration, you're going to be more angry when you find that Donald Trump will not be able to deliver, right? So he's saying mass deportations. Mark my words, it isn't going to happen. You're not going to have 11 million people thrown out of the United States. He might try. Maybe some of them will be thrown out. But why is it Donald Trump refused a bipartisan bill to deal with border security? Kamala Harris has clearly said we're a sovereign country, we need to secure the border. And by the way, as vice president, that wasn't her number one job remit. That wasn't her responsibility primarily. I'm not going to say the Democrats have a perfect record in this, but why did Donald Trump turn down a bipartisan bill to deal with this problem? Um, he only got 2% of his wall built when he was president. So if you're a Trump voter and you think he's going to deliver you from all these problems, he won't. He's lying to you. It won't happen. Um, but let's look at history. I'm talking here, not like I honestly think a lot of Trump voters just don't care. Um, and I do think that there's this sort of cognitive, igno- dismissal of facts with a lot of Trump voters. Not everyone, but it's there. Actually, before I get into that point, a quick thing about talking about supporters of a candidate. Now, I don't think all Trump voters are bad people. I've never said that, and it's not my opinion. I think there are Trump voters who are struggling, economically, and they're frustrated with the Biden administration. And they might be frustrated with things like illegal immigration and those sort of issues, and they genuinely believe Donald Trump will deal with it. So I get that if their issue is making ends meet, then saying that Trump's a convicted criminal may not be a major concern. I think that should be a concern, but there are other issues. Um, that's why when Biden put his foot in it and came out with that garbage comment, initially it had been aimed at the comedian at the Trump rally, and there was anger from the Puerto Rican community. But then Biden put his foot in it, and now Republicans have, or pro-Trump Republicans have cast that as Biden vilifying all Trump voters, and the Harris campaign was embarrassed by that because they probably remember Hillary Clinton's deplorables comment. The thing is, some Trump voters absolutely are extremists. We saw that on January 6th. We saw that with the militia group that tried to kidnap Governor Gretchen Whitmer. There are absolutely extremist Trump voters. You'll get extremists on the other side. Of course, you will. You'll get far left extremists. And the individuals who tried to kill Trump were extremists. But I would say, on balance, there's more of them on the Republican side. Um, I mean, put it this way, when Hillary Clinton lost, you didn't get enraged Democrats trying to violently storm the Capitol. You just didn't. There were protests, but not violent protests, not like that. Um, And you can't really point to the Black Lives Matter riots of 2020 because that was more specific about the issues around the police, the the issues that the black community faces, and all of that. Um, I'm talking here about elections, okay? Uh, but yeah, I think Biden's comment was ridiculous. And if the Democrats lose, I think they'll be angry against Biden. Biden of 2024 isn't the Biden of 2020. And I think he's a decent man, but that was very unhelpful to the Democrats' campaign on this in this election. Whether it makes a huge difference in polling day or not, I don't know. Um, but I do think it's legitimate to call out extremes within Trump supporters. I do think some MAGA types are absolutely nuts. I really do. When you get someone who has the Constitution written all over his shirt, even though he's supporting a candidate who has absolutely disrespected the Constitution, and he tells a reporter it's holy war, how can you respect someone like that? How can you consider them to be just a normal voter? Um, I do think some Trump voters, and I'm not just talking about a few, quite a lot, are nuts. I think they're absolutely extreme and prone to violence because they've convinced themselves that it's all elite out to get Donald Trump, and no matter what happens, they will just go along with it. Fake news. I mean, that really, I don't know how you can reason with people like that. I really don't. There are, of course, Trump voters that have abandoned him, and if they may not have crossed over to Harris, but they have got tired of Trump. Um, but the thing that I find quite baffling as an outsider is the ridiculousness of the Electoral College system because you could theoretically have a situation where Donald Trump gets back into the White House because he wins the Electoral College, but loses the popular vote. Now, how is that fair? Um, in modern history, let's say over the last 3 decades, um, the Democrats have won every single election on the popular vote except 2004. That's the sole exception when George W. Bush got more votes than John Kerry. But in every other election, the Democratic candidate has got more votes than the Republican candidate in every election of the last 30 years. In fact, going back to the first Clinton win, we could say the last 32 years. So that in itself is interesting. If anything, that shows, if we deem the Democrats to be a centre left party, then that, if anything, shows that the majority of Americans, despite what outsiders might think, are actually slightly more progressive and slightly more left wing than right wing. I think sometimes, particularly in Europe, there's this perception of Americans as being really conservative and clinging to guns and religion. Certainly that's a faction, but many Americans aren't like that. And the electoral college, or excuse me, the election history of recent times shows that the popular vote almost always goes to the Democrat. Now, there is something fundamentally wrong when a candidate can get almost 3 million more votes than her opponent, and yet she still loses. I mean, I think if anyone has a right to be shouting about stolen elections, it's Hillary Clinton. Whatever you think of her, she got the popular vote. Now imagine if Donald Trump had got millions more votes than Clinton, but Clinton won by the Electoral College. Trump voters would absolutely be getting their guns out. No question about it. Because if they violently riot when he loses both the Electoral College and the popular vote, what would they do in a situation like that where, um, you know, his opponent, it's just, well, it's obvious what they would do. And I think the dangerous thing here is no matter what happens on election night, Trump is almost certainly going to, at some point during the night, claim victory. No matter what happens. Because, I watched a film recently, The Apprentice, and of course, as a film, you have to take some of it with a pinch of salt, but I think there's definitely truth in that. The fact that Trump's tried to get it banned, and he called the actor and the director, I quote, human scum, um, says a lot, you know. But the focus of that film was young Trump's relationship with Roy Cohn, very controversial lawyer, and himself a very toxic character. But the mantra was attack, 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 never admit defeat. Um, and you could just see the influence that that had on Trump over the years. Probably initially it was as a ruthless businessman, but it's been carried into politics. I think Donald Trump sees graciousness as weakness. You know, he does not have the integrity um, candidates like Hillary Clinton, Mitt Romney, John Kerry, every defeated candidate has had over John McCain over the last 30 years, except for him. Um, that's bad for democracy when you basically have a sore loser. So I would say to Trump voters, how do you justify that? How can you justify supporting a candidate who will not admit that he's lost? Do you genuinely believe that the system is out to get Trump when he was the beneficiary in 2016? I mean, if the system's all out to get Trump, then how do you explain that he got into the White House? Surely, if the system is out to get Trump, he wouldn't have even got into the White House. So that conspiracy theory is nonsense. I do think there's a problem with the Electoral College. And if it happens this year, as happened in 2000 and 2016, I really think the Democrats should peacefully make a huge thing of it. I think they should go to the Supreme Court, and I think there should be a really forceful but peaceful campaign to get the Electoral College abolished, because it is a ridiculous situation that one voter in, say, Wyoming has essentially the power of three voters in New York or Florida. That's fundamentally unfair. And I know the argument is it's so that New York and California don't always choose the president. But if they have a bigger population, they have a bigger population. Each person's vote should matter. So why should a New Yorker or a Floridian or a Californian, why should their vote matter less than someone in a state with a smaller population? That's fundamentally unfair. Um, but anyway, history shows us that in most elections, the candidate who gets a popular vote does win. So, given that it's almost always been Democrats, then I think it's reasonable to guess that Harris will almost certainly win the popular vote in this election. Will she win the Electoral College? That's harder to tell because in the swing states it really is neck and neck. She could get three and Trump could get four. She could get four and Trump could get three of the swing states. I hope that isn't the situation. I hope it's clear cut either way. I even say I'd actually rather Trump had a straightforward victory than it was uncertain, because it would be an awful situation if it was wrangling in the Supreme Court. Although maybe, I mean, I think a Trump presidency would be dangerous, so that's maybe preferable to a Trump president. I don't know. I just think uncertainty is definitely not good. Anyway, I'll wrap this up, but I'll probably make one or two more videos before election day. But the history shows us that the Democrat candidate almost always wins the popular vote. And most of the time, the popular vote is aligned in the Electoral College, but not always. Not in 2000, not in 2016. 2016, especially, is a glaring example of the flaw in the system, where a candidate can win the presidency yet get far fewer votes. That is just not right. I think Clinton was wrong to blame sexism because actually it's a little bit disrespectful to the millions of men who voted for her. So, I hope Harris doesn't do the same thing and blame sexism, because women can vote for whoever they want. I mean, I do think voting for Trump, if you're a young woman, is, if you're ever in a situation where you may need an emergency termination, then Trump's policies are going to be have an adverse effect on that. That's all I would say. But we'll see what happens. But whatever happens, if Harris wins, Trump will claim he's won. If he's won, he'll claim he's won, of course, but he won't be gracious about it. I mean, this is another thing about the Trump campaign. What has Donald Trump done to try and encourage Democrat voters over to his side? And if he wins, will he be a gracious winner? I mean, I'm talking about him being a sore loser, but would he be a gracious winner? For example, if he wins, I think it's extremely unlikely he'll win the popular vote. But let's say that he does. He wins the popular vote and the Electoral College. Will he say, I'm going to unite America? Um, and the way he does it is by dropping this revenge rhetoric. But I think Donald Trump is a bitter individual. I think he will go for revenge. Will he give Kamala Harris any credit at all? Donald Trump is not a unifying figure at all. He's a deeply divisive figure. Say what you want about Harris, but she has absolutely got Republicans over to her campaign, and not just Republican politicians. So, whatever faults she may have, she at least has tried to unite. I'll leave it there.